put everything together, piece it together, see how it looks, and then you're going to put everything up to the bike and mock it up and see how everything fits. So now we've got all the headers in position. What we've got to do is aggregate these, but at the same time, we've got our radiator mount that's going to go to the motor. You will need to make sure that's in the right position, because the last thing you want to do is have to unbolt all this again to make sure that's in the right spot. So we're good there. Now we've got to aggregate the collector and see what we can do here about making this little jigsaw fit nicely. So as we were talking about before, having this fluid to make sure that everything fits, and oiling and greasing everything up is of a huge value to you at this point. Now on the connector itself for the mid pipe, everything is numbered. So if you're looking, then all you simply have to do is line this up and go, okay, number 1 is this pipe, number 4 is this pipe, so this is the way that it goes. So now we have a little jigsaw to fit together, which takes a lot of patience, so don't rush this. Again, make sure everything is lubed correctly so it'll ease fitment. All right, we've mounted up everything here now through to the collector. Now we have the mid pipe to mount up. This is where our fuel injector loop goes. That's the air screw is going to go in here. Now in looking at the way this mounts up, if you put it side by side, this is going to be nice and clear for here. Now I'm going to disassemble the entire system and go through it, make sure everything's torqued to spec. We'll start with the flanges mounted to the cylinder head. We'll put the pipes back on, then we'll put the collector on, and then we'll put the mid pipe on, and lastly we'll do the exhaust can. So we're going to deal with this again section by section, and you'll see as I go through each piece what's involved, and then you can follow on from there. Now when you're tightening up the bolts onto the cylinder head, go a quarter turn at a time on each bolt so that you keep the exhaust flange, when it goes into the cylinder head, flat against the exhaust gasket. The last thing you want to do is take one bolt all the way in and then chase it with the second bolt, because that's not going to work. The worst thing is after we got this whole job done, that when you fire the bike up, you've got a header leak, and it's going to come from this area, so you have to disassemble everything and start over. So once you run the bolts in, get them hand tight, and then a quarter turn at a time or a half a turn on at each bolt to snug that slowly all the way into the cylinder head so it stays flat. Takes a little bit of time, but like everything else we do on the set, if you take your time initially and do each step correctly, you never have to go back and redo it. Now we'll go ahead and insert the down tubes from the spigots, get those in place, and remember when we did the mock-up, our exhaust, the radiator hanger here must be in the correct place before we tighten everything up. So we'll put pipes 1 and 2 in place. Once they're in place, we'll go ahead and secure the radiator back to the block. Then we'll add pipes 3 and 4, or we can just put all the pipes in at once, but at some point this has to get put in position so that it's not in the way of the pipes and it's not in a position where we can't reattach it to the engine block. All right, Dave. Okay, now we have the collector. We know from doing the mock-up, each one is numbered so it goes to the tubes correctly. So we'll go ahead and insert this in place. Again, like we did last time, slowly, patiently. Now as we're assembling the whole system, what we've got to do is make sure that these pipes seat all the way to the end of the collector. So as you push and work them in with using WD-40 and oil, it'll go all the way till it stops. Once that's done, once you've got the collector firm, all the pipes in firm, we're going to go now, because we don't need space with the radiator, we're going to go ahead and put that bolt back in and secure it in place, fasten that up, and we're good to go there. The other thing you can do, either now or later, is attach the springs at this point. Usually it's a good idea to go ahead and, as you do each section, add the springs as we're doing final assembly right now. Obviously, with these, you need a spring puller. You attach them up to the mount on the top where the spigot is mounted to the cylinder head, and the bottom loop goes further down. That will all, as you assemble it, tension everything and put everything and keep everything in place.
Determined.
So now we have most of the front of the bike done. The spigots are attached, the bolts are torqued correctly. We've gone ahead and fitted all the down tubes. We've gone ahead and connected all the springs from the flange to the mounting part. So all of that's tight. We installed the collector, we lubed it again. All the pipes are tight all the way to the end of the junction. So this is done. Now we've got to fit the springs here on both sides to tighten this up. When this is done, then we can go to the mid pipe, put the mid pipe on, bolt it, and go from there. So let's finish this section up. Now we're going to go ahead and install the mid pipe, but there's a couple of things to remember. If you have your fuel air sensor, then we have to screw this back in before we install this pipe in place. Now we know there's 4 turns of thread on it, so to make sure that when we reinstall it, the wire's straight, you want to turn it back the number of threads you have. Now I can go ahead and screw this in, fasten it up. There'll be no kinks in the wire at all by the time it unscrews back in. So that's a really simple thing for you to do to make sure that when you screw it back in, that the wire sits perfectly straight. Now we have the wire dead straight, no kinks in it whatsoever. Once this is installed, I can go ahead, tighten this up. We'll be good to go. So air fuel sensors in. Now we can position this down so we don't hurt the sensor. Install the mid pipe. Again, run it all the way up to where it needs to go, and now we can rotate it all the way on. So the next thing to look for, this is on. Now the bolt provided in the nut, we can go ahead, push this through, and then that, once we mount this whole system up, will allow us to mount the bracket here firmly in place against this. So for now, that's coming on in a little bit. We can move to the back of the bike and look at the exhaust can and how that's all going to fit. Even though we thought we had everything tensioned up correctly, when we put the mid pipe on, the bolt hole wouldn't line up. So a little soft persuasion with a sand mallet just to tap the headers gently here to make sure that they're fully seated into the collector. Worked like a charm, then this all moved in. Now comes to a decision with you and your motorcycle, whether you ride a passenger or not, whether you want to retain the passenger pegs. So we have our exhaust here, which we will gently slide on. And then we have our mounting bracket, which will mark up. Then we have the option now, as this fits, will fit perfectly there, to simply mount the aftermarket cam with the system in place and retain the stock pegs. Now in this instance, that's what we're going to do. We're going to just mount this here. Should at a later time we want to keep this configuration but move to a separate mount, we do have that option. M4 does supply you with a super light aluminum mount which takes the place of the stock component that way. So either or, what's really nice about this kit is you can retain the stock things if you want to. So now we've mocked it up, let's go ahead and put this together and retain our stock mount. Now when you're putting these together, they come with a rubber band. So it sits inside, so if you position it inside first, and then you want to start at one end and the edges clip right over. So you'll need to start on both sides at the same time, and be aware that this is an extremely time-consuming and tedious process. So like everything else, we want to do it once, we want to do it right. So quite simply, just take your time and work your way around the hanger, making sure that the bracket is fully seated on the rubber piece so that when we come to install it, it won't flop out, because then you've got to start over. So with just a little bit of patience, we can very simply put this bracket together. So once this is done, we'll go ahead and hang it all up. So we have the mount in place. What you want to do is make sure that on the can it's not crooked, so that it's perfectly straight and in line with the can. Now the can's going to turn forwards and backwards. That will help you in mounting the can up here. We're going with the strap in a back mount position because that's where it seems when we rotate the can, where everything wants to line up. We're completely clear of the swing arm, so there's nothing to worry about there. So our bolt's through, we've got our nut on the other side. We need to tighten this. Once we've tightened this, we'll go ahead and put the springs on this side. Once that's done, we now have to go ahead and pull the seat. We have to find a certain wire. As we disconnected our valving from the throttle, the computer's going to know that this isn't working when it runs through its initial key-on diagnostic phase. So in order to bypass this, the instructions require you to go to the black box, find a wire, cut it, and then put it back. Now, as we will eventually put the stock system back on this bike, what we have to remember is that where we cut it, we need to be able to reconnect it. So in cutting the wire, we need to make sure there's enough space that we can go back and just use a very thin, small connector and put it back together so the stock exhaust can go back on and these can be reconnected. So again, as we said when you're doing this project, make sure as you go through each phase that you keep everything so that you can put the stock system on. And if, as in this case, we're required to cut a wire, you know that you've got enough wire there to reconnect it so you can reuse the stock system. So to finish this up, before we fire the bike up, we've got to take care of this wire. Okay, so according to the instructions, we pulled our black connector off. They told us to look for the black and white wire, which actually is not in the correct place as specified in the instructions, so it was a bit of a bomb squad moment. But using logical assessment here, there's only one black and white wire in the whole top row. So as there's only one black and white, even if they say go left to right or right to left, we cut the wire. Now the thing to do is when you turn the ignition on and turn the kill switch to the on position, the motorcycle will go through its own pre-start diagnostic check. Now, if the cables move, then obviously the wrong wire was cut because it's still thinking that the stock exhaust is on. But we ran through the diagnostic, we went ahead and checked that the cables don't move. It didn't see that, so now we can go ahead, let the bike cycle through, the fuel pump prime, and we have no fuel injection warning light, no signal. So there's no fuel injection light, no warning signal, so we know the right wire was cut. Seeing as we've done with that, I'll now go ahead, rebuild, put the ECU back in, put all the relays and everything back where it belongs. And then we're ready to put the radiator back on, hang it correctly from the top mount, then put the bodywork on and go for a test ride.
Morning seems to come for us too soon.